Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film Interstellar. Christopher Nolan's a director who I've never been the biggest fan of, but I always am interested to check out his latest film, mostly because of these ambitious ideas that he has, so these big, large-scale kind of film productions. Interstellar has a lot of ambition on the big screen that few directors even attempt anymore and have all these big ideas within a big sci-fi epic. Most sci-fi stuff is more about action and thrill rides. It's commendable for Christopher Nolan to try to make films like this. I don't think he's as heady a science fiction director as he certainly thinks he is, and a lot of the public thinks he is. He definitely tries to attempt to make that with a large budget, and that is commendable, but part of his ambition is he's clearly very influenced by Stanley Kubrick, considering how much 2001 like this movie is, and that it references 2001 I could see at least twice. One of the biggest things that's separating Christopher Nolan from someone like Stanley Kubrick. Christopher Nolan really wants to entertain you. He really wants to be a big director, and he wants to have a big movie that will have action sequences in it. But he also wants to be this heavy science fiction director who cares more about ideas than box office, but he never has kind of clarified exactly which one he wants to be. And honestly, I think he leans more towards a director who cares more about box office. He's more Spielberg than he is Kubrick. And in a lot of ways, he feels like if Kubrick were to have to direct a Spielberg movie, but kind of keep the Spielbergness about it. If you look at either Spielberg or Kubrick, they have different theories behind what kind of movie they're trying to do. Well, like Kubrick's very cold, almost methodical, whereas Spielberg's a lot more emotional and audience friendly. And Interstellar wants to have all these big ideas, but it also wants you to understand them. It wants you to get them. It doesn't want you to feel lost, and you really shouldn't be. It's not really a challenging movie, but it wants to act like it's a challenging movie. And Nolan's never exactly clear what his motives are on screen. That's why sometimes his endings feel a little messy. When he's more action sequence and box office, he almost feels a little more at home than when he's trying to do these heavier kind of movies. You end up with a film that's trying to do two things but doesn't exactly get to do either. Interstellar takes place in the future. When that future is, we're not sure, but it's in the future, and the world has gone through, we assume, kind of a global dust bowl period. We're not exactly sure like what happened to the cities or most of the world. It takes place in the country, and we see that it's kind of had an economic downturn, and we assume lots of people have died, maybe, I don't know. We're to assume that everything's kind of been calmed down and people are trying to get the human race to survive on Earth as the Earth is dying, and there's way more farming. And then Matthew McConaughey, who's living on this farm with his two kids, after having some weird anomalies in his daughter's bedroom with gravity, finds coordinates, and they follow them, and they find a hidden NASA base where they find Michael Caine and his daughter, played by Anne Hathaway, and find out they're trying to launch NASA ships into space to find a new planet for humans to live on. Matthew McConaughey, who is a former NASA pilot but never really got to, jumps at the chance to do this despite having kids, but he really feels like it's the best thing to do, and he goes off into space even though it could take years and years and years, and he might not come back until his children are fully grown. And he goes off with Anne Hathaway and goes and tries to find new worlds as he goes through a wormhole to a new galaxy and sees where a previous team had gone to discover new worlds and find out whether they are inhabitable or not for the human race in the future. If you look at science fiction cinema, it's been around obviously since with like A Trip to the Moon and Metropolis, but it really didn't start going and having regular science fiction films until about Star Wars. And between 2001 and Star Wars, you have this weird period, and even going into the beginning of when the Star Wars film started, having more films that had more of a 2001 element to science fiction for a while. And Interstellar feels like one of those films that tried to cash in on 2001's success, which was a major success at the time. It feels like a film that's very influenced by that, but doesn't want to go as weird and strange as that is, and be a little more box office and explain what's going on, and so people aren't leaving the theater either absolutely hating it or having intense philosophical discussions. But it's not entirely committed to the thrill ride of it. This isn't Gravity. In fact, I think Gravity was a little clearer about its intentions. I like a good hard science fiction movie, and if you really want to see that, you can watch a Shane Carruth film. With this, it's doing that for a little bit, but it's also jumping around quickly. It's not staying on moments. It'll cut out certain moments and then dwell on others that aren't really as important. It'll have things with NASA and be very science fact. One of the examples I've read and heard often mentioned is how come when they blast off in the rocket, it's a typical space launch, which feels very science fact, and then after they go through the wormhole, the ship that needed all this stuff to launch off of the Earth to various planets, and it can take off from there. It feels like what's going on with this film is Chris Nolan kind of stayed towards the science fact, and it was more grounded, and then wanted to go off into all sorts of different directions and be more of a big budget science fiction film. The heavy concept seems to be secondary, which is kind of why I think people think and like that these films are heavier concepts with him. He's kind of holding your hand through it. You don't really have to think too hard about it, because even if you do, he's gonna just like tell you what's going on. They explain to you in Inception the concept of it. They explain to you in this how if you fly near this planet, this will happen. He still has that problem where he's committed to some parts, and some parts look really beautiful, and if I caught certain segments on TNT, which is what happened to me a lot with The Dark Knight, I'd be totally sucked in and I'd end up watching a half hour without even knowing it. But then there's other segments where I'm like, okay, I don't know what the point of this is. It's very pretty, and it's shot by one of my favorite DPs working right now, Hoyt van Hoytema, who also shot Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy and Let the Right One In. He did this because Wally Pfister made the incredible mistake of directing Transcendence. It's very beautiful, and I think it actually looks a lot different than Nolan's past couple films. I was lucky enough to have seen this in 70mm IMAX film. Apparently the film platter was so full they couldn't even play previews before it because the film is so long that it fills up the entire film platter. It's very gorgeous on film, and the special effects look particularly great. If you can see this in an IMAX, especially in IMAX that's playing it on film, which some aren't and some are, but if you can watch it in a good IMAX, I think this is worth it when this is the supposedly last film released on IMAX 70mm film. So if you can watch it in a good IMAX, I think this is worth it. Matthew McConaughey was good. It's not like True Detective or like Dallas Buyers Club or Magic Mike, and you're just so enamored with his presence. And I didn't feel like that as much, but he's able to be vulnerable in certain places. He's able to be very masculine and striking. We all talk about the reconnaissance, and he's built up his whole career so he can do this ginormous big studio film, but it's not up there with those performances. Dallas Buyers Club isn't an amazing movie, but his performance in it is really great, and his performance in Magic Mike and True Detective, and I hope he isn't just sacrificing doing roles like that to do these big things because they probably have a big paycheck and they have a big profile. I hope he doesn't do too many of those. I kind of prefer him going back to the things that made the reconnaissance rather than the afterwards. Anne Hathaway and Jessica Chastain kind of do a similar thing where it's a role that if you had a lesser actress in either of those parts, it wouldn't be as compelling or as interesting, and the way they're written, they aren't great parts really. When you have a great actress doing those great parts, they can kind of come alive and have more nuance than they really should, especially with Jessica Chastain. She has both a vulnerability and a determinedness. There's certain actors who understand the storytelling element in their acting, and I think Chastain understands that better than a lot of actresses in her generation, where when you look at what she does through performance, she almost is able to tell the story along with the filmmaker. I don't think it's as mind-blowing and crazy complex science fiction as maybe it's portraying itself to be. It's not sure whether it wants to be a hard science fiction film or a thrill ride action blockbuster, and trying to do both never really works. At his heart, he's more of a studio director. He's more of a director. He still wants to appeal to the audience and have things explained for them, but he also like thrives for something more, but he's not really willing to let go of that to do that incredible crazy thing that everyone's going to be like, oh my god, I can't believe he did that. This movie just feels like it is. It does a pretty good job of it, but I don't think it's this amazing game-changing science fiction film that he thinks it is. The idea of doing a space movie that's going to blow us all away in this day and age, I don't think he really knows how to do that. He just thinks he can do that like the old guys did it. And the old guys didn't do it how those old guys did it. They were building something new, and he's not really building something new. So this is the spoiler section. If you're planning on seeing Interstellar, I really strongly emphasize you do not go past the spoiler section. Just please do not spoil it for yourself. You don't want to ruin a fun movie-going experience just so you can be a fucking know-it-all. When they get past the wormhole, I do think the film really changes and it becomes less interested in the science fact element. One thing about Christopher Nolan, he showed the crew the right stuff, a print of the right stuff, because he loves film. That felt like the first part of the movie. It did feel like the right stuff, but sped up to 2014 and an IMAX and shit. Then it becomes more sci-fi. It felt like more of him trying to be entertaining. And I think one of the biggest showmanship things to do is have a surprise in your movie. And the big surprise in this was Matt Damon. I did not know Matt Damon was in this. He's not in any of the posters or any of the press material or trailers. Matt Damon's part is kind of interesting, but it's also like they're just kind of throwing in an antagonist. Like they had run out of other stuff going on, and the film was like, well, where do we go from here? Oh, let's have a bad guy now. Matt Damon does feel a little like James Bond villainy, and I know Nolan's a huge James Bond fan, and it shows in this section. It almost felt like a little like Roger Moore-ish. I like the surprise of it, but I think it almost makes my point where that section feels like he's more being a commercial, big budget director. Nolan likes the sexy idea of science fiction being about ideas rather than explosions and stuff, but then he still has to have a fight where people are gonna break open their spacesuit things. Nolan would never make Barry Lyndon. I think that's the thing that like Nolan needs to wake up and fucking realize. Do what you are good at. There's so many directors who know exactly the kind of movies they're making. And with the Matt Damon thing, that was what I like about him when he goes for stuff like that, when he goes for the excitement and gets into the audience. But then when he has the thing with like McConaughey and the black hole, I didn't like how he's explaining to the robot what's going on. Like, who gives a shit about why does the robot care? The robot don't care. It was clearly there to explain stuff to us. That's like not what I want from a big sci-fi movie. I don't want it explained. I want to kind of figure it out. And I could have probably figured it out, and it would have been a more interesting sequence, and there'd be like debates about it and what's going on. But I know it was going on, so I'm not like really thinking about it. I like the weird time travel elements, and it does feel like he really goes on this odyssey, and it does feel episodic. You don't really see episodic films anymore. I like when he's in the faraway future. It almost feels like the end of it is setting up a sequel, especially with the going after Anne Hathaway parts. I don't know how long that journey was for him. I would have liked to understand that. It didn't look like he aged that much, so I would have liked to understand his perception of time a little bit. How does time work where she is? Is she like dead at this point because he went through a black hole? I think she would be still there, right? Does the wormhole do time shifting? Nolan needs to find out the kind of director he is, because that's the thing that Spielberg and Kubrick knew. And that's the thing about AI that was it was weird, but it was an interesting experiment, is like if Spielberg, who actually had originally developed this and was thinking about directing this, if he had done this, he would have just gone straight for the hardcore sci-fi shit. With Spielberg, you always know what you're getting, whether it's Lincoln or Warhorse or whatever. I might not like it, I might not be into it, but you know what you're getting. And same with Kubrick. And Interstellar wants to do both and isn't as heavy and smart as it really thinks it is. And I think that's kind of the fault of it, is it feels a little too watered down. Nolan made a better film than he did with Dark Knight Rises. But then you look at Inception. What Inception did really well, Inception is entertaining. And Interstellar isn't as much fun. It's not a thrill ride, but then parts are, but then wants to be heavy. It's just like, I don't want to think about what Nolan's trying to do, because Nolan hasn't really thought it through entirely the way he has with Inception. It's an interesting and ambitious film, but it's not the masterpiece that I think everyone wanted it to be. I don't think it's a failure, because there's a lot of films that want to be those things that aren't, and are still good. I saw a big budget movie by a big director. Its pacing and what it was trying to do was different than a lot of big budget, big studio directors, but it's still not the big heavy sci-fi of a challenging, great science fiction director. He really hasn't broken through and made the heavy, smart person movie that he pretends he's making. He's making the movie for people who think they're seeing the big, smart person science fiction film, when it's just another big event at the box office, pretending to be that. So if you have seen Interstellar and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.